suppose it was the first time we ever had to go back completely to the drawing board, and instead of modifying or kind of changing things around the edges, it was very much, okay, this needs to be transformed in some cases, and what we have just doesn't work now. So back to the beginning, and you know, the question of why and what's kind of what are those really effective things kind of came into play. Definitely in terms of technology and resources, huge amount of time and effort, and for some of our students as well, we found they flourished online. So we got very different people who had very different experiences of it. Some people who came alive during remote learning, and who haven't looked back since, really. Yeah. But then it was a huge struggle for others.
If this past year has really taught us anything, it's really that education and learning must be accessible and meaningful for all learners all the time. And that's whether whether it's online or in person. And you know, when all of this went down in March of 2020, schools that already adopted a universal design for learning approach did really quite well in transitioning to a fully online platform. In our classrooms, we need to think about making them more learner-centered and facilitating learning rather than teaching it. And most importantly, you know, transitioning lectures and lessons to become more flexible for learners and embracing that universal design for learning approach, like our lesson plans, our assessment deliveries, flexible learning opportunities, and engagement that naturally brings out the highest level of success from each individual learner.
So it was about stripping things back, and it was also about applying. I did the course in UDL at the same time, and I really needed to make sure that my students could own their learning as well. So when they weren't with me in the school for that week that they weren't there, that they knew what they were supposed to be doing.
I think slowing things down this year and taking things step by step and really breaking things down, and maybe not trying to rush through the curriculum as much this year, and making sure that kids actually, right, do you understand what we're getting, and writing things up using PowerPoint and saving them digitally so they had access to them later on. So then they started becoming kind of more in ownership of their own learning.
The biggest challenge, I think, was looking for opportunities for teacher voice. That distance was there, and it was kind of like, you're there, you've got your classes, you've got your modules or your subjects, so deliver the content, do you know? But there was very little opportunity for us to come together as teachers, as professionals, and discuss what was working for us.
We found it like subject departments are great, but cross-curricular, especially in secondary school, you learn so much, but it's the big challenge now is, well, how do we keep the knowledge that we've individually learnt, and how do we share that, and how do we actually get best practice from this and become these reflective practitioners? And the big challenge is, well, how do we make that time, because our curriculums are so jam-packed.
And it's the difference between a blended learning program being really successful or it kind of falling apart, I think, is that joined up collaborative piece that we need to have as a staff. If we are going back to square one and we're redesigning this, we want to do this properly, and we can't all just be in our living rooms doing our own thing.
Personally, I don't see us all going back into a lecture hall 5 days a week. I just don't really see it happening. I see the benefits and challenges of online learning, and I think moving forward we can take a lot from that. I think the whole idea of not having to travel, being at home, it opened up the doors for me, and I could access postgraduate online with no extra cost of travel, no childcare if I didn't need to, and I think that just opened the doors for me. So I think it could open the doors potentially for many people down the line. But I would be more centered towards the blended approach. As we said, that sense of belonging, that social aspect, I think that was a really key piece that was missing a little bit.
I just find it a real challenge for the introvert students, the one that doesn't speak up in class and the one that doesn't involve in social interaction within the classroom. I find they're more isolated, and I find myself getting emotionally involved as well, because I felt I had to engage individually with these students. As a learner, I was going from bed to laptop, dinner to laptop. The feeling of isolation and anxiety, and it was really overwhelming at times. This year for me especially, it was like my peers were my educators. It's not all about the education and what we're learning, it's the community itself.
It wasn't an expectation of you go into a discussion room and you do your work. There was nearly time given to that social aspect, and we were missing out on that. So at the very beginning, I think we all had a bit of a moment during the first month or two where we were trying to come to grips with remote learning, and then we were encouraged to link in with other students and know we were all in the same boat.
I think mental health has to be a massive discussion around how to assist not only students but educators that are going to be teaching and learning remotely. Mental health awareness has to be a big thing going forward, I think.
Initially, when in the last year, going back to March, all our students were excluded on a very practical basis of accessibility to technology. And then they weren't able, when we kind of got that right then for the second lockdown, it was because they needed the human connection, and they needed, they needed somewhere to go, and they needed the support more so than they didn't just need to be able to access the learning.
People who are not familiar with technology, like, just to not dismiss that, that's where people are. And I think it was a real leveler for, like, teachers were in the same position as students were for a lot of this year.
Yeah.
We had to learn new things as well.
And I suppose the fact as well that students had to learn as well. They're so great with their mobile phones, but give them a laptop and an email and Teams, and they don't necessarily know what to do. They need to be trained as well, and they need to become familiar with these things. So it's great saying, oh, we'll give devices to students and that sorts the problem. It doesn't. People need to be trained. They need to feel comfortable. They need to feel confident.
I think one of my key successes was the way I instilled the technology. The technology enhanced learning module that we done, I think it really added to the environment that we were put into, because you have teachers who've probably been teaching for years within classrooms, and they were only starting to get used to the technology. And I was able to come in and introduce new technologies that we had been using, and it worked really well. It took a little bit of time for students to get used to it. Even today, it's something I'm still using. I'm still looking into. I'm still looking for new things that might work.
I think the reimagined educator is a learner. Do you know that? And I think the people have been put outside their comfort zones. And I think that's a great thing, because I think in education, it's very easy to get comfortable in your role, in your room with your students, do you know? So the putting the focus on us to learn more about how to interact with students, how to check in for student learning, how to plan and prepare classes. I think that's great. And I hope that continues. Do you know, now it was difficult and everything like that, but just and for teachers to admit, I don't know how to do this, I think that's massive.
I think Karen's totally right there. I think we all go into education because we loved learning, and I think at a certain point not that we forget it, but it's not to the forefront of our mind that, we're learners as well. And I think this year really opened it up as like, well, no, we're learning new things and we're adapting, and we're adapting very quickly, because it was completely unprecedented what happened, and a lot of us were thrown in the deep end, and it was sink or swim, and I think most of us swam, and the ones that weren't swimming were brought along by their colleagues eventually.
We all need to be educated further to assist all students going forward, because the educator themselves are not used to the situation that we're already in. So it's education for the educator, I think, at this stage.
So somebody who's very aware of their the power and impact of their actions and words, and somebody who's aware that they are very much in a creative design role, and somebody that embraces that.
And it's what underpins my teaching is that more enhanced, more aware, more polished version of an educator in the caring role, an educator who is developing positive relationships.
And as a teacher, being genuine, being yourself, letting your learners know that, you make mistakes, you have faults. We don't always get it right. Be gentle with us, be patient with us. We'll be patient with you. And being willing to learn alongside your learners is rather than present yourself as some sort of sage on the stage is really important.
This sort of time that we're about to get, like post-pandemic, has huge potential as well. For us to sort of reimagine things. And I think it kind of comes back to what the point you were making at the start, Shelley, about the universal design and like designing learning experiences, and that educators are aware and awake to the fact that they're designing learning experiences and learning environments, because instead of doing what they'd always done, or if they're stuck in a rut, all of a sudden they had to completely change.
Now that we have this awareness, now that we're talking so much more, what I have found myself doing a lot more is being more confident in creating that challenge to my colleagues, and being confident in having that conversation and keeping the conversation going. We're not going to sit back now. And I just don't want this opportunity to be lost, where things are open for change.
And using your voice as an educator. All the talk lately has been about, listening to the student voice, which is incredibly important. But we also need, and Connor touched on that, it's time to be radical. We have the opportunity to sort of voice our opinions and have people sit back and go, where in the past we might have sat back quietly and say, okay, this is the way things have always been done. We're just going to continue to do it this way. Coming out of COVID on the other side, we can, be a little bit more radical and say, wait a second, this is what we need to do moving forward.
So I did history, first of all, and probably should be a history teacher, but never really got there. After 2 world wars, there was a focus on more like liberal social values, and hopefully we can harness that sort of energy as well. And I think the key there within that is now we've got the awareness that we need to act and realize that we are actually agents within our systems, and that the last 15 months have completely normalized change.
In this conversation about being radical, about moving, and this is the time, isn't it? And it's, absolutely, it's kind of made me, as an educator who feels that I am quite forward thinking and reflective and progressive, do you know what? There's a lot more for all of us to keep doing. Absolutely.